Get the shot, get the shot, get the shot had been the rallying cry throughout the pandemic, and 94% of the uniformed military followed that order from the Defense Secretary, as did over 80% of Americans having herd immunity, but dipping to the sound of Defense and Defense Production Act, being a team player, taking one for the team. However, while Blue Virginia had been quick to label me as having been against the government response to the public health crisis, all the way out to chic coffee houses in Seattle, they don't care to mention that I had actually brought the very first case in challenge against the vaccine mandates. A case now that has gone through 3 separate litigations and is continuing on in the federal courts with an upcoming pleading due at the end of the month from attorneys at the White House. At least in federal court from Virginia to Texas and Louisiana. Both judges and attorneys have described me as a bit of a litigation hobbyist, which is not necessarily the worst thing to be called, especially if you have a chance to go grab your court shoes to go to court and take a shot against the shots in the once-in-a-lifetime pandemic. At least for me, that works, but because for me, it beats sitting on the bench. Probably most people had watched at least a bit of the recent Summer Olympic Games in Paris. Put on your paraphernalia and rooted for your team. And probably most people, even if you did not play ball at Division I college or just even made university in high school, probably at least a little bit familiar with the game of basketball. Pretty easy. Whole bunch of guys on the court put the ball in the basket. Even if it means some painful memories for some, especially those kids who were never picked on any team in grammar school, perhaps lacking that required hand-to-eye coordination, or perhaps recess just wasn't your favorite class in school, not really caring much at all about what extracurricular sport you might be able to play, even if topics like that are certainly at the top of the list for kids in Arlington Public Schools. Even apparently more concerned about playing these sports than being accepted to an Ivy League college. Your body, your choice. And just about every single one of those students, as well as their faculty and staff at the school, decided to go play for the team and had been required to be vaccinated during the pandemic. And this sports analogy may help some to understand a recent decision in a rather novel case brought to challenge the mandates coming up to bat. To mix sports metaphors, as we're now going against the White House again in court. Like many public school districts for 2 years, the Los Angeles Unified School District, the LAUSD, out there at the home of the Lakers, had required employees to get COVID-19 vaccination or lose their jobs. Same thing down in Richmond and many places across the country. Another case we're going against right now down in Richmond. And a very recent decision in Health Freedom Defense Fund, v. Carvalho, surprisingly by the very progressive Ninth Circuit, had decided to reverse a dismissal and remand this vaccine mandate challenge case back to the federal district court, or to use a sports analogy to help folks understand that don't go to court. This would be like getting fouled and getting a chance to go to the foul line to make a foul shot, or better, like getting a do-over after a bad call by the ref. So what's going on in LA with this vaccine mandate case? First question. The best way to describe this case is to contrast it with other vaccine mandate cases that had made headlines in the press during the pandemic, primarily going against the vaccines for religious and medical reasons. Tactically, exemptions are an easier route in court, and what it's described as an as-applied challenge. Not really taking a direct offensive line against the mandates, which may be good for everyone else, but just not good for them for religious and medical reasons, of course. Kind of like telling somebody you would be glad to give or support whatever political cause, but not for the Hatch Act that prohibits you as a government employee from taking an active role in politics. Nice soft excuse. Salesmen, they call them objections. You have to learn how to overcome objections in sales. It's not you, baby, it's me. Same thing. And quite a few cases in headlines were generally of that order, from healthcare workers at Houston Baptist Hospital to the Navy SEALs. But in the LAUSD case, the public school employees decided to take another, more direct approach, bringing what is described in court as a facial challenge. One of the most difficult challenges to mount. In local case, USB Salerno, I'll tell you all about that. Because the regulation will be upheld by the government. The government's going to win as long as there were no circumstances, none, in categorical exclusion for those who took logic and philosophy that render it invalid. The school district employees, without even a union to support them, brought that claim that the vaccine mandate had interfered with their fundamental right to refuse medical treatment, which of itself is not enough, but went further, had a central element to argue that the COVID-19 vaccine is not a vaccine. Not in the contract, you can't do it. On the rationale that traditional vaccines should prevent transmission or provide immunity to those who get them. And as those who had been following the sciences should know, or even in the press, by July 2021, in Provincetown, Massachusetts, up there on Martha's Vineyard, around 1,000 fully vaccinated gay men had added a new vocabulary to the pandemic lexicon: breakthrough infections. I'm sure some people have heard that term by now. The school district employees claim that the COVID-19 vaccine neither prevents transmission nor provides any real immunity, and suggest it mitigates symptoms for someone who has gotten it and then gets COVID-19, but this makes it just a medical treatment and not a vaccine. And so now these plaintiffs, after the decision on the Fourth Circuit in June, have an opportunity to go back to the federal court to present that argument in the trial on the merits. Do it all over again. Back to the court. But pandemics are historically associated with fear, confusion, and despair. And with mounting infections and mounting fatalities, some people kind of freak out. Some adopted what they considered the abundance of caution approach, calling it prudent. And there had been even a few studies to claim that persons who had refused the vaccine tended to be more risk averse and more likely to have accidents because of this risk aversion. However, just like when picking teams for a pickup game of basketball, not every team or every player is automatically a good player. And if you're really, really risk averse, you're going to be trying to pick your good players and not just have anybody at all on the team. Even if they are wearing a uniform or trying to impress someone by doing fancy tricks like dribbling really cool between their legs and all that, or spinning the ball on their finger. You tend to pick those folks for your team who are actually going to put that ball in the basket and get that shot. Very, very important. You want to win. Vaccines, especially in pandemics, vaccines may have been effective against polio and even measles, but this is a novel coronavirus. Don't get confused. It's like apples and oranges. It's like, coronavirus is not influenza. But all sicknesses are not the same. Diabetes is not cancer, believe it or not. That shouldn't be too hard to understand now with the pressure off. Okay, you choked a little bit, you got under the pressure. But now go back to the lockers, take a shower, and review the tape. Treatment or vaccine is a good start. These school district employees in LA at least are making that argument, going back to LA to play. But from the beginning, our litigation took a very slightly different approach, but also in the line of a facial challenge. It started out July 7th, 2021, right after Independence Day weekend, getting to the root of why there had been these breakthrough infections. Should have been known from the beginning. It's what we call a patent defect. They knew or should have known that these things were going to be defective as soon as they left the manufacturer, and why the vaccines had failed to prevent infections. Sometimes vision is 2020 in hindsight, but some may recall mention of the Emergency Use Authorization, EUA. That's that document that the Janssen vaccines had revoked. The products that were never even approved by the FDA, and some people took those. Talk about risk aversion. But the emergency use authorization had been used to rush these so-called vaccines to development, which has a legal declaration document that had stated at the very beginning, back in March of 2020, that these had only been developed as countermeasures, very, very distinct from vaccines, and going further to restrict the intended users for those countermeasures, restricting them to citizens residing abroad, which if you're working for the LA School District, you're probably not, as well as active duty members of the military, which again, they probably are not. And in contracting, those familiar with that part of working with the government, any distribution beyond the terms of that contract will be described as an unauthorized use or commitment under the federal acquisition regulations, so FAR, in the military, the DFAR. And in the military, especially after the anthrax litigations, when that does not occur, when we don't have, effective vaccines, there was a pretty involved process, Dobie Rumsfeld, requiring both informed consent, which did not necessarily occur, as well as rigorous monitoring. Make sure that, when you're taking these experimental drugs, recreational drugs, there's somebody to kind of, be the adult and make sure nothing happens to you. And you're essentially a test subject or a crash dummy for the new product. So that maybe, if you make it through being a hero, then other people will be able to benefit from your daredevil adventures. But why did they use this term or nomenclature, countermeasures? Very important. This is where we really start to get into the science that some kids who probably couldn't make the basketball team might more readily understand. I understand that Dr. Fauci actually played basketball, so he might not understand either. But let's continue with a sports analogy so that everybody who's familiar, at least with basketball, can kind of understand what's going on here. Say that you are going to have a pickup game in a schoolyard. Everybody's been there, picked or not, for the team. You were there. You are probably going to at least make sure that both teams have an equal number of players. That kind of makes sense. 5-on-5 or whatever you have. I don't know. You got 50 guys playing in basketball. It's going to be a crowded basketball game, but 25-25. But the best example of what had occurred during the rush development of the vaccines has been available in open view all along in the submission presented by Moderna to qualify for the emergency use. Approved around like November 2020 when they finally had their big document where they had arbitrarily chosen dosages ranging between 25 and 250 milligrams. But to take on how many members of the invisible enemy? That's a big, big question. 25 of us against how many? 250 of us against how many? You can't sink a basket you can't even see unless you're really, really good. You can do that blindfolded. I once did a half-court shot, totally by accident, but I wouldn't try to say that I could do it all the time. And you definitely can't sink a basket you don't even have. And so it may not be quite as big a surprise to find vaccines that had failed to prevent infections, these treatments, because they had been developed basically on a hope and a prayer. Yes, our scientists were actually engaged in prayer, like 24% of atheists, that they might work effectively. One reason why even the test did not use the term effective. You take a look at those tests that we had on the quote-unquote vaccine, but only efficacy, a distinction with the difference. And this gets us to the crux of the argument where our litigation against the vaccines had begun, and all with just a simple FOIA request that had been submitted not long after the announcement of the American Rescue Plan on the first anniversary of the pandemic, all the way up to the White House. And we have a response due finally back by the end of the month from the White House on that. We began asking about a very basic epidemiological metric known to scientists as infectious dose, which is just like it sounds. Like with poisons and chemicals, or even fentanyl, many are familiar with, or some are familiar with the term lethal dose. Well, infectious dose is actually described by the CDC on their website in a scientific report that had been published on May 7th, 2021. There were a lot of articles, different magazines, even National Geographic. They were talking about how this number was not known, but we finally had an official statement from the CDC, an official government guidance, so it wouldn't be medical misinformation. 3 months before the FDA had approved the Pfizer product for what? Private label marketing. That's right. Private label marketing and FDA approval is like being granted kind of a franchise to sell your product in the marketplace under some selected trade name. Selling, jerseys and T-shirts for your favorite team or whatever. It's the same thing. Now, there are some arguments regarding what is described as a new drug application or NDA, which was not used, or even an ANDA or abbreviated or accelerated new drug application. Your attorneys in intellectual property law might be familiar with that. But what's important here is that the CDC officially acknowledges in this scientific report. Good to read scientific reports of the pandemic. Could help you out. And this is a quote: "The infectious dose of SARS-CoV-2 needed to transmit infection has not been established. The amount needed to transmit infection, how many team members are on the side of the invisible enemy that your vaccine or treatment has to be able to go against." This is, like prerequisite knowledge, but not for it. Can't do it. Sine qua non. Gotta have this information before you go out. You don't want to, run to the goalpost and not have the ball. You're not going to do anything. But the amount needed to transmit infection. Maybe, and it's just a guess, wild guess, bizarre conspiracy theory, when the measles and polio and even smallpox vaccines had worked, been effective, eliminating these terrible diseases, they may have, and wholly conceivable, I could be entirely wrong here, but they may have been developed with knowledge of that, like, kind of important number, making it actually a vaccine, which the folks in LA are saying this one was not, and not just pulled some random number out of the sky. I don't know, called on the magic forces of the universe or whatever, and stuck on a label that said vaccine, good enough to fool quite a few folks, and got folks in times of fear, confusion, and despair to take that product in an abundance of caution, like some guinea pig in the laboratory. And you might want to brace yourself for this last bit of information, because according to the science that you may not have read, especially if you decided to become a guinea pig for a treatment experiment, when we rush countermeasures to development without knowledge of how many team members they have to go against, we require a large sample size phase 3 clinical trial to provide metadata for use in improving the boosters to eventually develop an effective vaccine. And you may have heard that term, transitioning to phase 3. It was in all the papers. And it may not, however, have gone the way that it went in your head. You that you were freaked out about, dying or getting sick or whatever. Had you actually read a report, you would know that, at least with the first variant, your chance of even catching this virus about less than 5%, which is not really a big chance of actually getting it. But at least nothing happened bad to you, and you can tell your children and your grandchildren about that great time you had in pandemic when you joined the team to be a big hero. And, won the game, I guess. And remember to get boosted the next time it's your turn, hero, because we are counting on you. Go team. Get the shot. Get the shot. Get the shot. See you. And great game. This message was approved by Major Mike Webb. Honest. This has been a Film Ways presentation. Darling. And y'all go back now. Yeah.